Okay, so in February this year, a historic moment in the Grahamstown, now Makanda, High Court took place, when it was declared that fracking in the Karoo was illegal. This was after an extensive report which indicated that at least 52% of the areas in question could not be fracked because of their sensitivity, and more importantly, that no water was to be used in the Karoo because it was a limited resource. Much of the public debate around access to water in the Karoo, both in the late 19th century and in contemporary debates around fracking, have pitted the rational and scientific against the intuitive and the irrational. I'm interested in the dichotomy these debates have set up from the perspective of language, in particular the visual language that both these apparently opposing epistemologies offer. The work Below the Sediments is an iteration of an earlier work, Even in the Long Descent, which were color etchings printed onto paper, in which 5 panels set up 2 distinct visual registers or languages. Along the top of this image runs the mountain range of the Snowberg, with farm topography forming the middle ground. This unpeopled landscape with traces of cultivation, fences, farms, roads and windmills derives from the traditional depiction of the picturesque landscape, a painting practice imported from Europe in an attempt to interpret, contain and control the space in which the settlers found themselves. The lower register depicts the earth below. Cultural theorist Professor David Bunn, in an essay on the work, writes, "Caught between these 2 planes, on the threshold between them, we are unsure of whether the lower view is of the stratigraphy of an unearthed grave, a bank of earth, or a pool of oxblood, in which bodies huddle, hiding eyes or genitals, or tightening into rigor mortis. The implicit narrative landscape elements at the top are met and matched by an older, obvious unity of the bodies below." This series, made in 2002, was partly in response to my time living in New Bethesda, a small town in the Karoo, and the uncanny sense of walking upon earth that held millenniums of time below the surface. The area is well known for its fossils of dinosaurs, and there are several distinct ones in the riverbed across which I often walked. The traces of their ancient presence are like a call to question the stories that lie dormant beneath the surface. In Below the Sediments, the 2 registers of above and below have superimposed upon them a 3rd register, the diagrammatic representation of hydraulic pipes laid below the Earth's surface to extract shale gas. Several years ago, the threat of impending fracking in the Karoo seemed like an inevitability. My understanding of the issue was filtered through accounts in the local media, which seemed overwhelmingly opposed to fracking. For example, in a 2014 article that appeared in Forbes Africa entitled, "I Want a Fracking Future," Matthew Norville, the director of the conservation program at the Wilderness Foundation, is quoted. "Fracking raised its head at almost the same time we started working in that area. There is no doubt that it influenced the way we worked and the way some of the landowners decided how to collaborate with us. I think fracking hit a lot of the landowners sort of right between the eyes. They suddenly realized that properties that had been in their families for generations were now under threat. It was possible their land would get damaged and their children or their children's children wouldn't be able to make a livelihood from farming. You have to bear in mind it's prime natural rangeland, grazing for sheep and cattle. The properties that had been in their families for generations and that are prime natural rangeland for sheep and cattle has a fraught history dating back to the mid-17th century, in which the access to water played a major role. In the paper Landscape of Conquest, Frontier Water Alienation and Khoi Strategies of Survival, Leonard Gilker and Robert Shell describe how the Trek Boers, moving up from the Cape into the Karoo and laying claim to the limited water resources, and through acquiring and legitimizing their control and access to scarce surface water resources, disrupted Khoisan patterns of life and effectively destroyed their traditional societies. The mountain range that is depicted in Below the Sediments is part of the Snowberg mountain range. It was into this harsher area of the escarpment that from about 1740, writes Muhammad ad-Hikari, that the frontier advanced rapidly. In his article, A Total Extinction Confidently Hoped For, The Destruction of Cape San Society under Dutch Colonial Rule, he writes, farmers needed to be even more mobile in this environmental zone to exploit both summer and winter grazing to obtain year-round nourishment for their stock. To the north, they came into conflict with the Zan-speaking Sun and along the northeastern frontier of the Snowberg region with the Swai-Ai, among others. The further colonists moved from Cape Town, the more tenuous the Dutch East India Company control over its subjects became, and the greater the degree of lawlessness in the border regions and beyond. By the late 1760s, pressure on resources reached critical levels, initiating sustained and coordinated Sun insurgency and guerrilla attacks against settlers along the length and breadth of the frontier. During this period, Trek Boers, with the help of the Dutch East India Company, embarked on an exterminatory military offensive against the Sun. A century later, access to water in the Karoo again came to a crucial turning point with the advent of the Cape Underground Water Rush, which begins in 1891 and marks the moment of more intensive farming by European settlers in the Karoo. Lance van Sittert, in his article The Supernatural State, Water Divining and the Cape Underground Water Rush, describes how, by the second half of the 19th century, the lack of a dependable water supply was severely constraining the Cape Colony's agricultural development. This dearth was particularly acute in the interior. In years of plenty, the Karoo was imagined as a promised land, a new internal frontier of white settlement, and in years of drought, the desert graveyard of colonialism. Water was the key missing element in both the realization of the dream and a version of the nightmare. The realization of the dream was achieved by drilling for underground water below. Above the surface of the earth, the windmill marked the spot at which access to channels below had been gained, a sign that points to mechanisms below the earth's surface, and a symbol that indicated territorial possession. A small detail in the landscape over here is the barely discernible yet distinctive windmill. This small topographical detail marks the landscape as a sign of land which is occupied and under cultivation and, by extension, civilization. In the recent public debate on the effects on the Karoo environment and the proposed fracking for gas, the economic imperatives driven by yet another European multinational company who harness expert scientists and geologists to their cause are pitted against a nostalgic desire on the part of the locals for an undisturbed landscape. Here, for example, in an article, Karoo Fracking, Water, Wealth and Whites, published by the Mail and Guardian in 2013. Stretching across the heart of South Africa, the Karoo has stirred emotions for centuries, a stunning semi-desert wilderness that draws artists, hunters and the toughest of farmers. It is now arousing less romantic passions. If energy companies and the ANC get their way, it will soon be home to scientists and geologists mapping out shale gas fields, touted as game changers for Africa's biggest economy. What was undeclared by the artists, hunters and the toughest of farmers is that their interest in an undisturbed landscape was also economically driven. What was underplayed by the expert scientists working on behalf of the foreign investors is that their research was less than rigorous. I perceive even this recent debate around fracking constructed in the media between the scientific energy companies and the emotional local farmers. A similar dichotomy being set up between rational science and irrational superstition that took place during the late 19th century with the juxtaposition between the scientific, foreign, rational model of geology imported by the Cape colonial state for drilling boreholes for underground water, and the irrational practice of water divining by the local farmers. Van Sittert, in his insightful article on water divining, argues that the crude epistemological dichotomies of the history of science should be treated with a more nuanced approach, as the civilizing mission was not always confined to strictly rational models. Moreover, in the contemporary debate around fracking, it was in fact the rational scientists such as Robert Scholes and Greg Schreiner of Wits University in their paper, The Scientific Assessment for Shale Gas Development in the Central Karoo, that provided a carefully nuanced approach to the risks of fracking in the Karoo. I'm almost finished. Neither of the debates between the Karoo farmers and the Shell company now, and the farmers and the state geologists in the late 19th century, raised the spectre of the dead as a concern. Interestingly for me, an indication that there was and is an innate intuition of that history is that not only experience, but the morals and ethics of the water diviner were often deemed important by more traditional adherents of the practice. As Van Sittert noted, experience could shade imperceptibly into instinct and even faith. Faith was also invoked in the 2011 public meeting organized by Shell's consultants, Golder Associates, slogan, Engineering Earth's Development, Protecting Earth's Integrity, held at the Somerset East Town Hall in the Karoo, which started with a prayer to protect God's creation. The article, Fracking the Karoo People Say No, goes on, most of the attendees bowing their heads were farmers who face the possibility of losing everything if, heaven forbid, shale gas is found under their farms, or for that matter, anywhere in the Karoo. Below the Sediments is made up of two layers. The front layer is printed onto brushed metal, evoking a history of the mining for precious metals below the Earth's surface. The layer behind is drawn from diagrammatic images I came across on the internet of horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing. These have been adapted to create the hard edge pipes. The earth has literally been cut away to create these shapes. In their uncanny surreal aqua blueness, the water, which makes up the pipes, seems to refer more to the unearthly realm of the spirit than that of the underground. The pipes and the cracks created through the laser cutouts threaten to disturb the floating bodies. This further dimension, both literal and metaphorical, is about the collision and collusion of languages of representation, and are intended to reveal something of the different representational practices of art and science. Here, the two languages are brought together to speak about the apprehensions that are often veiled by rational language, that of disturbing the dead that lie for the moment fossilized below the sediments. Thank you.